on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the hard knock life, but not the jigga kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share their interests together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments and the lectures, fanboys, professional artists and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NOC. In full color, you see me. The Hard Knock Life.
Welcome to a special episode of Hard Knock Life. I'm your host, Keith Chow, and I have a very special guest. We're going to do things a little differently. And I wanted to just do a one-on-one with a friend of mine who has a brand new series out with Dark Horse. It's called Shoot First. And if you're a reader of Nerds of Color, you may have read a few weeks ago my first impressions of the first issue. Issue number 2 just came out in stores on Wednesday, so I was fortunate enough to have Justin Aclin, the creator and writer of the series, on tonight to talk about the first 2 issues of Shoot First and kind of give us some history on the book and maybe talk about where the book will be going from now on. A little bit of background. If you know my writing with Toy Fair magazine, Justin was my editor way back when. And fortunately, through social media, we've kept in touch ever since the demise of Toy Fair magazine. But it's great to have you on the show, Justin.
It's great to be here, Keith. The unfortunate demise of Toy Fair magazine.
Exactly. Both of us are still action figure enthusiasts, though. However, so
absolutely, yeah.
Well, it's nice to see that you were able to transition from editing funny magazines about action figures to writing funny books about pseudo-religious alchemy battling, angels and demons and atheists. So let's just jump into talking about Shoot First. Can you give us a little bit of background as to where the germ of the idea of the story came from and how you brought it to Dark Horse and turned it into a real ongoing series?
Sure. So Shoot First is about a team called the Secular Humanist Occult Obliteration Task Force, which is, I know how ridiculous it is. It's on purpose.
Well, and then Dark Horse has a thing about, supernatural acronymed agencies anyway, right? So it fits right into like BPRD and RIPD and various other.
And I mean, that's sort of where the germ of it came from. Is I knew I wanted to work with Dark Horse because they're a fantastic comic book company, and I was like, well, I love that kind of supernatural battling team book, like BPRD. And when I first came up with Shoot First, it was about 2009, and I was reading Beasts of Burden by Evan Dorkin and Jill. God help me. Jill Thompson.
I think so.
Yes. So, which is.
We'll go with that.
Okay. So, it's that same sort of supernatural book, but it's instead of a team of monster hunters, it's a team of pets. But it still has that that same like really great action and supernatural element to it. And so I was reading that and I'm like, this is fantastic. I would love to do this kind of thing, but what could my twist be? What could my take on it be? And so what I came up with was a team that, instead of fighting the monsters on the monster's own terms, like you usually see with this kind of team, sort of thinks that all supernatural creatures are kind of baloney and goes after them on their own terms and uses their own disbelief as a weapon against the monsters. So that's where it came from originally, and then as I developed it, and I've talked about this before, it sort of ended up, it wasn't my original intention, but it dovetailed with some stuff I was going through at the time, in terms of personal dealings with my faith and how I was feeling about that sort of thing at the time. And so the two of them kind of fed on each other, and it became this. Went from this very like mercenary, like how can I read a Dark Horse book, to this very personal, idiosyncratic, kind of book that hopefully, could only come from me. So that's how it came about.
Right. And you had previous dealings with Dark Horse, right? Because you've written a couple Star Wars books for them, right?
It went in the other direction.
Oh, okay.
Shoot First was pitched as a short story for MySpace Dark Horse Presents, which was their previous anthology back in 2009.
Hence the MySpace.
Exactly. And then I've been working with my terrific editor over at Dark Horse, Dave Marshall, pretty much ever since then, to take the short story and turn it into a miniseries. And because it's a creator-owned series, because it's not an easy sell by any means. It's taken a few years to put it together. And in that time, while we were working on it and while Dark Horse got to see, what I was capable of with the scripts and that sort of thing, then the opportunities came up to work on some of the other stuff, the 2 Star Wars graphic novellas that I did, and this book called Aclin, which is an adaptation of an online game. And that just came out in hardcover, too. And I definitely recommend people check that out, too. It's got some really great art by Vasilis Lolos.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a comic book about video games. That's right in the Nerds of Color sweet spot. So, speaking of which, I know that you said that shoot first is kind of a hard pitch, and a lot of that I think is I mean, I wouldn't say it's not controversial, right? To say that we're going to have a super team of atheists, for lack of a better term, and
yeah.
What kind of have you gotten any kind of pushback or kind of negative fan letters? You know what I mean, from people who maybe are not necessarily taking the message you're trying to put out there?
I mean, I think people kind of know what they're getting going into it. Like, we put angels versus atheists on the cover, so unless you pick it up thinking, oh, these angels are going to kick these atheists' ass, then you pretty much know what you're getting into. I have seen, I've actually seen from both directions. I've seen a couple reviews from people online where they couldn't get past, I mean, and it's a completely valid opinion, of course, but the fact that it takes the opinion that religion is not correct, that's part of the worldview of the book, and that was a major negative for some reviewers. And then, I also had seen, when the book was first announced, like, a lot of skepticism, no pun intended, from atheists, who weren't sure how, atheism was going to be portrayed in the book, and, there's always that, like, oh, how, they're fighting these creatures, but they don't believe them, is that, are they trying to say that they're stupid, is it, and so there is a lot, it's a bit of a complicated plot, and hopefully, if people pick it up and give it a chance and check it out, they'll see what it's all about and where we're coming from.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think that the point about how you deal with atheist doubt in the book is kind of interesting, because for those of you who have not read the book yet, and please correct me if I'm misinterpreting, but I don't think I am. That one of the ways that the team battles these, you call them outside actors, is through it's specifically through their doubt. They've created these weapons that feed on their disbelief.
Right.
And it's interesting that the book, I read the first issue around the same week. I'm wearing a Pearl Jam t-shirt. That Pearl Jam's new album came out the same week. And I think I was listening to it while I was reading the book, and there's a song on the new album called Get. And for those of you who've read any of my Toy Fair articles, I frequently quoted and used Pearl Jam song title puns in a lot of my articles. So, but there's a line in one of their new songs called Getaway where Eddie says, sometimes you have to have faith in no faith. And it kind of, that line kept ringing true for me when I was reading the book, because that's essentially how that's their superpower, right?
Right. And in the course of the book, a lot of the members of the team kind of struggle with, normally you see people having a crisis of faith. And for the members of Shoot First, a lot of them have a crisis of lack of faith.
Yeah.
And one of the themes of the book is, that religion, even though for myself and for the characters in the book, they can't believe in it anymore. There's a reason that religion has stuck around for so long, and it's massively comforting, and in some ways it seems like it's built into our DNA. And so you can't just walk away from that and, expect things to be like they always were. And so each of the members of the team kind of struggles with that in their own way, and that's definitely one of the themes of the book.
And I mean, and I think it's definitely one of one of the things that draws me to the book, just the kind of exploring that, like you said, the crisis of no faith, and how, because the main character, I'm assuming he's not really the main character. I think the main character is actually Mrs. Brookstone.
Yeah.
But the character that you introduce in the first issue, who kind of plays the audience's eyes and ears, in my opinion, is the infidel, who is a can you I'll let you, can you talk a little bit, and we're going to delve into some spoilers here if we haven't already, but can you talk a little bit about the infidel character and his kind of how he's introduced in the first issue, and his little a little bit about him, and why you use him as your kind of into this universe.
Yeah. So Infidel is a character who S.H.O.O.T encounters on the mission that they're on in the first issue. Where basically I'm going to have to back up into this a little bit in terms of the plot of the book, but so what S.H.O.O.T refers to as outside actors is basically this race of extra-dimensional creatures that feed on humanity's faith. Basically, any supernatural creature that you can think of from the past, several thousand years has been one of these outside actors in various guises, and some of them, actively manipulate humanity or try and steer us in certain ways in order to keep our faith going. And with the advent of the age of reason and science that we're in right now, they sort of smell danger coming. So they're basically trying to bring about kind of a biblical apocalypse, an apocalypse that follows prophecies that have been laid down in religious texts. And the thought there is that they'll lose a whole bunch of their food supply, but whatever humanity is left will be completely in their thrall forever and ever. So that's what S.H.O.O.T is trying to prevent. So in the first issue, they are in a mosque in Afghanistan, which is under attack. It seems to be a pseudo suicide bombing, but in fact it's a bunch of outside actors called Bottle Jinn, and what they basically do is they're kidnapping worshippers in the mosque who are full of faith, and they're going to stash them away and keep them for after the apocalypse. That's the idea. So while they're there, they encounter this character who happened to be there having a crisis of faith and realizing that he no longer believed in God. And S.H.O.O.T realized that he can fire their weapons, which it requires a very certain particular mix of mental energies in order to do. So not everyone can do it. And so they bring him aboard as a new member of the team. And that was a very long explanation for who Infidel is. But basically, he's an Afghan Muslim. He was an interpreter for NATO, and he's had a crisis of faith, and he's not sure where to turn. And then S.H.O.O.T kind of enters his life, and he ends up falling in with them, even though the whole concept of it confuses him.
Yeah. And so then that kind of leads me into the next thing that you mentioned, that Infidel is an Afghan Muslim, and then the rest of the team is actually made up of varying ethnicities and several people of color in prominent roles on the team. So there you have Mrs. Brookstone, for example, who is essentially the leader of the team.
Yes, she's the team leader.
Kenshin is who's an Asian American character. You also have two. I think both of them are British, right? The two. I know one's British. Is the girl British too? I assumed she was British. Okay.
I probably, in terms of diversity, I probably should have had not had two British people, but it just worked out that way.
Right, and then you have a robot, which is I think most people's favorite character. But the fact that a team of 6 and half of them are people of color is pretty progressive in for modern comic book audiences. Why did you feel it necessary to kind of populate your team with a diverse set of team members?
Well, I didn't want it to be a team of people like me. You know what I mean? Like, it would be very easy to just populate it. Like, when people think of atheists now, I think they tend to think of, like white dudes on the internet wearing fedoras and stuff like that. And I didn't want it to be about that. I feel like atheism doesn't get talked a lot, but it's a lot more, universal than we give it credit for, and I sort of wanted to be able to explore it through the lens of different people. That's sort of the specific reason. I mean, the general reason is there's way too many teams that are composed of way too many white people. You know, I did a blog post earlier this year when the rumor was that is it Michael B. Jordan was going to be playing Johnny Storm?
Right, in a Fantastic Four reboot.
Exactly. And the post was called "I'm sick of white dudes," because and I don't know. My point is that, you know, it was kind of twofold. One is that, you know, white people, we've seen ourselves portrayed in comic books and movies and media for years and years and years, and there's nothing, you know, that's going to knock us down a peg by sharing the spotlight and letting other people, you know, see themselves be portrayed as well. And then the other thing is that it's just not as interesting to write about, you know, people who are entirely like me, and I wanted to try and put myself in the shoes of people who have different life experiences than me and have different backgrounds, and to me that's more interesting to write about than just, you know, a bunch of people who are exactly like me.
Right. And as a writer, though, do you feel that that can also be kind of a double-edged sword, in the sense that because you are writing about other people and other people's experiences, do you feel like you have to be extra careful in how you depict those characters? Or I mean, is it really just about, you know, the story, and it's about projecting, you know, different images, and not necessarily like, you know, now I have to make sure these characters represent their races or anything like that?
Well, I mean, I think there's kind of two questions there. For one thing, I didn't want to write about characters that represented their races. You know, I wanted to write about characters that were these races. But it, you know, it does carry with it a certain amount of responsibility, and it's, you know,
what they say, with great power.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I, you know, ran out and interviewed, you know, a dozen African American women to find out, you know, what their life experience was. You know, basically, I just tried to write characters that felt authentic to me and did not seem to, you know, run counter to, you know, what I know of, you know, people of different races and ethnicities and stuff, you know, that didn't feel inauthentic. I might have gotten it wrong, you know. I mean,
well, no, and you know, I think one of the highlights about the book for me, in particular, is the character of Mrs. Brookstone. There was you know, now it slips me now, and I wish I should have done my research before we started the show, but there was a blog post somewhere. I want to say Color Lines, but maybe a different blog. You know what? I'll find out and I'll edit it into this later. But it was basically talking about how you know, the strong black woman is actually a stereotype, and
I saw that one. Yeah.
Yeah, there are tropes to like strong black women that can be just as dehumanizing as other more negative stereotypes. And what I find kind of refreshing about Mrs. Brookstone is that she is a strong black woman that doesn't fall into strong black woman tropes. Right.
And even, I mean, and I actually think you see two different sides of Mrs. Brookstone, and when she's with the team, I think she projects sort of that strong black woman aura, because that's the role that she feels like she needs to fill in the team. But you don't see her in that way when you first meet her. The first time you meet her is in a very, very vulnerable moment with her son. And so, you know, I think you can tell, even though she, you know, acts strong throughout much of the issue, you know that there's more going on there.
Right, and I think that's the case of any character, regardless of race or color, is that just to be depicted as a three-dimensional human being. I mean, I don't know why that's so strange to a lot of people, you know.
That's the hope, certainly.
Yeah. So it's interesting too, because it brings me to actually a concern that you expressed to me, independently of anything, and it deals with a reveal in the second issue. So again, the second issue just came out, and if you are watching this and have not read issue 2, pause the video, go out to your local comic shop, and purchase Shoot First #2, read it, and then come back.
I agree.
and buy a couple copies for your friends. But there's a little bit of a reveal at the end of issue #2, in which Kenshin, who is the Asian kind of the Asian character on the team, he's essentially hedging his bets. I don't want to get into like a lot of plot points or anything, but essentially, like as you said earlier, the outside actors are, you know, coming to create this, you know, end times, and whether or not there's a heaven, right, is like if you work for S.H.O.O.T first, you don't believe in a heaven or an afterlife. Right. But Kenshin is essentially hedging his bets just in case. That's how I read it. Just in case the S hits the fan, he's going to be all right.
Right, and he's doing that by kind of selling out the team to the Vatican.
Right. Which we didn't talk. The Vatican is this isn't controversial at all, but
no, not at all.
The Vatican is kind of the Snake Mountain of the S.H.O.O.T first universe, right?
But to be fair to the Cardinal, who's the only real human that we see in the Vatican, he's taking orders directly from an angel. Right. So as far as he's concerned, you know, that's, you know, you can't get more infallible than that. That's, you know.
Yeah, the God is talking to him.
Right.
So, but anyway, so that's the big. I think to me that was the big reveal of issue number 2. It's like, whoa, Kenshin's playing both sides, and you actually expressed to me independently that you know, and this was a result of you kind of reading Nerds of Color.
It's true.
Right, like it had occurred to you that perhaps you were tapping into, unbeknownst to like yourself at the time when you were writing the character, you were tapping into Asian stereotype, like kind of the inscrutable Asian stereotype. And can you talk a little bit about how that, because I know that you also said that one of the reasons we wanted to have this show is that you wanted to talk about the story reasons for that particular twist.
Right.
But I was just before that. Could you talk a little bit about like what was it about reading Nerds of Color that made you start questioning your own kind of authorial intent, I guess?
Right. Well, the concept of there being a traitor in the team is something that was first planted in the 8-page story, you know, 3 years ago at this point. Mm-hmm. So that's always been there. And when I wrote the 8-page story, I had an inkling that the traitor would be Kenshin, but I hadn't like completely nailed it down yet. So I knew there was going to be a traitor. It's in continuity. I was sort of, you know,
you're slave to continuity.
I was married to that at that point. Yeah. And then, you know, obviously it's got to be one of the characters on the team, and there's, you know, various reasons why you would and wouldn't want different characters to be the traitor. And then, you know, like I said, I had story reasons, which I'll get into in a minute, but then after it was done and, you know, I knew it was going to be Kenshin, and, you know, the issue was drawn and all that stuff, you know, reading Nerds of Color and reading some of the essays and, you know, even some of the Secret Identities pieces and stuff like that, you know, I started to realize that there was this, you know, like you said, this historical trend that, you know, I haven't read, you know, a ton of like old pulps and stuff like that, but, you know, this sort of, you know, the treacherous or the sneaky Asian stereotype that I wasn't intending to play into, but I realized, I'm like, you know, this could be read that way, and that was certainly not my intention.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I wanted to not, you know, to be defensive, to say, you know, hey, I'm sorry to have contributed to that, even in an unintentional way.
Yeah.
You know, but it is very tricky, and this goes back to, you know, what you were saying, like, do you feel a sense of responsibility? And is it harder? And it is. I mean, I don't want to say like, oh, you know, if there's a team and there's a traitor on the team, it has to be the white guy, because, you know, then there's no suspense to it either. But, you know, but knowing that it did end up playing into that particular, you know, sort of pernicious and well-established stereotype, I think I would re-examine, you know, that decision if I were doing it again now.
Well, I was just going to say, though, like, I think it's a testament to how well-written the books are so far. And I'm not just saying that because you're on the other side of the camera, but maybe a little bit. But honestly, when I read it, my first reaction wasn't like, wait a minute, why is the Asian guy? It was actually, whoa, There's a guy who's playing both sides, and
Yeah.
it honestly wasn't until you emailed me, I think, and was like, you know, let's talk about it, and then I was like, what? And then I was like, oh yeah, that is kind of like, I didn't get, you know what I mean? Like, it was almost like, I think Kenshin is a pretty well drawn character up until that point, and not that he isn't at that point, but I mean, I think
Right.
that it's not necessarily, that wasn't my first inkling that, like, Justin's a racist, but it was that's why I found it so interesting that you're the one who pointed it out to me, and that you kind of came to that realization after the fact,
Right.
after reading our blog and things like that. So that was really interesting to me.
I am giving all these things a lot of thought. I'm trying to do right by the characters, and also I just read a quote the other day from Alan Moore where he said, more important than being a good writer is being a good human being. So that's something I try and keep in mind as well. The reason why, and just to get into a little bit of the backstory then, the reason why I originally had settled on Kenshin as the traitor is I was looking for someone, basically, I was trying to find the most surprising character. And Kenshin, for two reasons, struck me as most surprising. One is that of all the members of the team who have like various backgrounds, some of them are more military, some of them, like Lord Byron is just kind of like crazy.
Yeah, it's almost, if he was the traitor, it's almost too obvious.
Right.
Right.
Okay. But Kenshin specifically is, he's the scientific liaison to the team. So for me, there's always this question with atheism of, oh, well, why don't you hedge your bets? Because if you're wrong, then you're going to hell. But if, religious people are wrong, then, nothing happens. Right. So, and most atheists are like, well, that doesn't work. But, so for me, to have the person who's hedging their bets be the most scientifically minded person on the team made it more surprising. Mm-hmm. And then also the fact that, it's a very Christian Catholic, hedging of bets that's happening where he's trying to get a papal dispensation to get into heaven. And it's something that was mentioned in the short story, but I didn't really get into in the miniseries in the way that I should have, is that Kenshin is, you mentioned that he's Asian American. He's actually from Japan.
Oh, right, right.
And he was actually a Shinto practitioner before he joined the team. So for me to have someone who didn't have that Judeo-Christian background sort of trying to get into Christian heaven seemed to make it more surprising. So that was the original reason why I kind of pegged him as the traitor, because it seemed to me like he would be the least expected character, without thinking about,
the other stuff.
Exactly.
Well, but and I think it goes back to like, and I think I knew that he was an Asian American. That just slips off the tongue.
Of course, yeah.
More easily. But I think that was the other interesting thing, that you really don't know a lot about Kenshin's, at least word. You kind of assume that he's probably Buddhist or Shinto just because of the way he looks. But everything else does seem very kind of, at least Judeo-Christian or Western religion, right? It's like there's Islam and Catholicism. I guess, and I mean, there's some like, oh no, there's Judaism. That was the other interesting, I think, in the second issue, is that like you like make Jewish terrorists, which is a really interesting. You don't see that. You don't see that in a lot of Western media.
If anything triggers controversy, I'm expecting it to be that. By the way.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, right. Those of you who are watching this after the issues come out, I think that is, when I read that, I was like, whoa, that's something that's really kind of different as far as like Western media. We don't often see that. But again, I think it's about pushing that envelope and really questioning how we view faith. I mean, this is, we're having this conversation on the heels of Marvel's the announcement of the other day about their new Ms. Marvel being a Muslim American teenager, and like, so there is a lot of kind of talk in the zeitgeist about like the way we approach religion and faith. So in that kind of context, I mean, that's the other thing I think that makes Shoot First kind of really stand out and really explore, because I mean, how many books are out there that talk about atheism from this kind of point of view? I don't think there are many.
None that I know of that are action adventure comics. I'm sure there are, sort of memoir, graphic novel type things that explore atheism, but there's never been to my knowledge, there's never been a team of action adventure heroes that are all atheist and are centered around atheism. So it's groundbreaking in a very, very specific regard.
Well, and then and like I said, we're going to have to wrap up pretty soon, though. But just in terms of talking about the issue of like faith and no faith, again to quote Pearl Jam. How do you? I know that you said part of the germ of the story came from your own kind of re-examination of your relationship with spirituality and faith. Do you consider yourself an atheist? And I
do. At the time when I started writing the book, I didn't. I considered myself sort of a more of
agnostic,
like agnostic, culturally Jewish. I was raised Jewish. Definitely, like, I didn't consider I don't think God is, the bearded guy in the sky, but, he's probably some sort of force of, what, blah, 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 whatever.
He binds us and penetrates us. Luminous beings are we.
And then in the course of working on this book, I've been able to say, full-throatedly, no, I am an atheist. I don't think there is a God. And part of the letting go process of that was trying to figure out, well, if there isn't a force or whatever, what have you, why are we here? Why are we living life? What do we have, to look forward to? And writing the book helped me sort of figure that out. I set out to write it to explore those questions, which seems weird to say about a book that, where there's demons and giant golems and stuff like that. But writing it, I started writing it without having the answers, and in the process of writing it, I
have all the answers.
Right, at least my answers and the answers that work for me. And so.
No, I was just going to say, I think, but that's it. That's the other thing that I find so fascinating about the book is that, one of the things about atheism is that it seems, it really is kind of like the mirror of religion in that and this is a case with like what we were talking about earlier about how the weapons work. Like you have to have doubt, right? Like questioning the doubt is similar to questioning one's faith, right? And then if you break from the doubt, then you can't fire the weapons anymore, and then you can't be part of the team. That's just kind of an interesting dichotomy to me that it kind of points out that almost like the rigidity of atheism, right?
I will say my original viewpoint of this, before it started to become about the difficulties of atheism, it was going to be about the dangers of certainty. And so that's sort of my personal viewpoint, is that religion, atheism, whatever you have, is fine as long as you allow room for yourself to say, I could be wrong. Yeah. And I think there's way too much in the world right now where people don't allow for that, and that causes a lot of problems. So,
and that's from both sides, right?
Yeah.
Well, one side more than the other. It's like I don't want to do. I'm totally against false equivalency. Trust me. Like I hate that. Like MSNBC is nothing like Fox News.
Right.
But there sometimes, and I joked in the NOC post about like, Richard Dawkins and Bill Maher, and I respect and admire both. But there are some times when, in one of Bill Maher's monologues, where it's like, all right, dude, you made your point.
Right. There's a certain strident branch of atheism, certainly.
Yeah.
But I do think that when done right, atheism, by definition, has to leave room for doubt, because atheism is about science, and science, even though we know a lot of stuff, science will always take a new answer if something better comes along that makes more sense. So I think if you have a real rigidity, then you're doing it wrong. And I think that's what a lot of atheists were responding to with the when they heard the premise of the book, which is, why don't these people believe what's in front of their faces? And of course they do. They just, they believe that they're fighting a creature that exists. It's just they don't think that it is a djinn or a golem or whatever it's pretending to be.
Right, and I mean, again, that's one of my favorite aspects of the book is that because to me, I don't find any dissonance in that. Like, it makes total sense that they see these beings, and it's like when Captain Picard. Oh, there's a fiction with a bunch of atheists, Star Trek. When Captain Picard encounters Q, you know what I mean? He's still like, yeah, Q is just a multi-dimensional being that controls crap. Like, it's not like he's not a god.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's right. I think that to me there is no kind of like they're not stupid for not believing. I mean that fuels their doubt because like now we know it's not God. We know it's just these like aliens essentially,
right?
That are messing with us.
But it was a really interesting point that you had in terms of for S.H.O.O.T's weapons to work, they do have to have they have to be within a very narrow parameter, and
I'd be interested to explore the science of those weapons. If there's ever like a technical manual to shoot first, I want to see that.
I got contacted by someone who wanted to write a role-playing game set in the shoot first world. So maybe one day there will be a technical manual, because that would be pretty cool. Yeah, and I think that's you'll see. I want to say that hopefully, almost any questions that you have about S.H.O.O.T and how everything works and what they're doing and their grander purposes, hopefully most of it will be addressed within. And again, this is only a 4-issue miniseries, but we managed to shovel a lot of stuff into here. There's a lot of story, and the next 2 issues 3 and 4, are bananas. So I'm really looking forward to people checking them out. But if you've got some questions and you're like, well, how would that really affect this? I'm hoping that a lot of that stuff will come up in the next couple issues. So we'll have to talk again after issue 4 to see what you think.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the series. Just real quick before we end, do you have plans just in case? I mean, I know it's a 4-issue miniseries, but I'm this is a idea that's a universe that exists, right? And it's an idea that you've had for many years now. I'm sure that there are plans for beyond or does everything wrap up in issue 4? And it's like a Walter White. You've kind of Vince Gilligan'd it, but if that's not the case, I'm assuming that there are plans beyond.
I will say that I would love to do more shoot first. There are definite plans to do more shoot first if everything works out well. But the end of the miniseries leaves the team in a very interesting place, and I don't know exactly where I would pick up from. So but that excites me because I like starting out, like I said, with some unanswered questions, and there's definitely going to be some when I get around to working on the sequel.
Well, that's a great tease, actually, and I think that's a nice place to end this special episode of Hard Knock Life. I want to thank my guest and my friend Justin Aclin for being a great guest and spending some time to talk with me about Shoot First. Issue number 2 is just hit the comic shops. You can find it at your local comic store. Go to comicshoplocator.com if you can't find a comic book store near you. Issue 1 should still be around. These are also available digitally as well.
Yeah, through Dark Horse Digital.
And then issue 3 comes out in a month?
Yeah, it'll come out mid-November. I don't know the exact... Mid-December, excuse me. I don't know the exact date off the top of my head.
Right. But so, again, thank you for being on the show, Justin. And
thanks.
Maybe we'll talk again in a couple months.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Keith.
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV. Yeah, pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the Hard Knock Life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share their interests together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments, and the lectures. Fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NOC.